Welcome to episode 20 of Divine Superconductor Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today we're speaking with Dr. Dean Bonlie, the inventor and creator of the Magnetico sleep pad. They've actually been around for 28 years. In 1989 and 1990, Dr. Dean Bonlie was involved in research regarding asthma and using bipolar magnetic sleep pads to help improve their condition. And so that prompted him to do further research and then eventually develop the Magnetico sleep pad, which is a very specific technology. You can't just put magnets on a bed and buy them online and glue them to a board and try to make it yourself. They really thought about all of the different aspects of it, the type of magnets to use, the distance between them, the polarity. So the first time I slept on one of these, I was actually living in an RV at the time under a power line. There was a power line literally right above my bed, probably 12 feet. And I had no choice at the time. I was working a lot, I was finishing school, and that's where my bed was, and I couldn't move the bed because it was mounted in the RV. And my sleep was horrible, and I noticed my immune system was going down and my energy was crashing. And then when I put one of those sleep pads on the bed, everything shifted. And I remember very clearly, I'll never forget this, lying down on the pad, and my arm twitched for about 30 seconds. And it wasn't uncomfortable or painful. Something was activating, and then I quickly fell asleep. And that was what really sold me on it. Wow, something's really happening. And then after a week of sleeping on it, things just started to improve, and I was really working with unlimited energy at that point. So let's jump into it. Here's Dean Bonlie, the inventor of Magnetico. All right, I am here with Dr. Dean Bonlie. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Matt.
Hello. Yeah, I've been following your work for probably at least 3 years now. I think I found you through Wendy Myers or at some health conference I was at. And I'm surprised more people don't know about your company, Magnetico, because it's absolutely changed my life. I think it's one of the best investments I've ever made. And we'll get into the product a little later, but just your material on magnetism. I've seen your lectures on YouTube. You have one called Magnetism, I think from 2006, around there. And then there's one called Magnetochelation. I've seen both of those multiple times, and I still learn every time I watch them. And just the power that magnetism can have on the human body is mind-boggling. I just interviewed Dave Stetzer that invented the dirty electricity Stetzer filters. And we were talking about grounding. And right now, grounding is a huge trend right now. I got into it during the start of my health journey, and, silver threaded sheets. And I did that for years, and rod to earth, and try to do it the best you can. But this is just another level to that, because as I understand it right now, grounding can actually harm us. It's more a discharge that we want to do more than be barefoot on the earth all the time. So yeah, a lot of little cool rabbit holes we can get into.
Yeah, the whole idea of grounding came about in northern, up northeast part of Montana, and the wind blows there all the time. There's nothing to stop it. It's the prairies, and so you get a lot of static electricity. And people found that whenever they grounded out, when they slept better because there wasn't this high level of positive charge on their tissues. See, positive is the polarity of injury in the body, and so you don't want to build up a high positive charge, because that puts you into an emergency response, because the brain says, hey, there's something wrong down there. And so it's sending out a lot more electricity to the body than it needs. We call this electricity, we call it vitality. Chinese call it qi, but it's just plain DC current flowing from the brain to the tissue. and it's pulsed at the different frequencies that are harmonics of the different tissues it's trying to target. So you're using up this vitality. Now, why does it pulse? You need to maybe review that. It goes back to the old resonance thing, where if you hit the opera singer hit the right note, he could break a wine glass all to pieces because he was at the frequency, which is a harmonic of the crystals in the glass, because you release a huge amount of energy. It's the same thing as like you put a kid on a swing, and if you push them at the right time, you'll get them go higher and higher with very little energy. Well, this is really what's happening you're pushing the electrons when they're all on one side of the atom, which so that you give them you send in another electrical pulse, which both of them are negative, so it gives them a push, and so they get going faster and faster, and that's what we call harmonics. So it's defined as a frequency is at the same frequency that the tissue you're trying to resonate or targeting. And so while you're sleeping, you're going through all these frequencies, all from about 7.5 hertz down to below 1 hertz and back up. So you target all the different frequencies of the different tissues, because each tissue in the body has a different frequency. And that's designed that way so that you don't use up too much energy at any one frequency. You could target a good frequency, a frequency that is targeted for a area in the body that is sick or diseased, and you're not wasting energy on the ones that are healthy. So when you're turning on shall we say, a big positive field all around the body, then the brain is going crazy, just trying to target everything because it thinks everything's sick. And by the way, this leads back to bipolar fields. When people first started using these magnetic pads and magnets all over the body, they copied that from the Chinese. The Chinese found that if they put a magnet on the body, they could get increased blood flow and electrical flow to the area. And so that's one of the first things that we checked on when we got into this business, is to see whether the Chinese were telling the truth. And sure enough, we used little sensors, and we could put a magnet on the end of your finger and show that blood was flowing down the wrist in an increased amount to that finger. And we also could show that increased electrical flow going down. And you could use the sensitive instruments. You could show that you had an increased electrical flow going to that. So a bipolar field is effective in treating a spot. Okay, use too much, though, you're wasting the vitality, and so you'll get less and less of a benefit from it. And so you don't want to use too many of them. And that's where this designed magnetic pads that first came out had all these little shower curtain magnets all over them, and so you had a bipolar field around each magnet, and people felt better for a while. But after a while, they couldn't hardly get out of bed in the morning because they depleted all their vitality. And so they threw them away or put them in the garage. So that was how this whole magnetic thing got started, was with a wrong concept. Now, the Chinese were smart enough to say, well, you only use that for 2 or 3 nights, and then you'll deplete the chi. And so you don't use it more than that in a given length of time, depending on your sickness and the severity. But they were, and that's the same with magnets. They say the same thing. You only use that for a short period of time. And then they started using smaller and smaller magnets, so it had less and less of effect, but it would last over a longer period of time. But that still wasn't that effective. Not near as effective as what we're doing with increasing the Earth magnetic field, because the Earth magnetic field is important in your life. And so that's where we went next. And we learned from we made a mu cage, which is made out of mu metal, which deflects all magnetic fields, and put 6 lab mice in there. They were young mice. And we had a periscope going down there so we could watch them into this cage. And guess what? They went into slow motion. And then we could open the door and get in there, and we could turn them over, and they could hardly get up. And so we thought, well, are they going to die, or what's going to happen? So they started eating huge amounts. They were trying to get energy from their food. And the energy, of course, was not enough for all of them. One of them died within 24 hours just from lack of Earth magnetic field, because we'd reduced the Earth magnetic field down to only 20% of what we have today. And so that doesn't look good for us in the future. Now, fortunately for us, we have a magnetic reversal coming. And that means the sun's magnetic field will overtake ours. So we'll be in reverse field during the day, but at night we'll be in our weakened magnetic field. So there'll be a period of time where we're flip-flopping back and forth. So everybody's going to want to be on a magnetic pad to sleep on at night or the daytime. Most likely they'll start out sleeping on them in the daytime, so they'll have a negative magnetic field underneath them. And at night they'll have the Earth magnetic field. So, but it'll be weaker than what we have now. Now, eventually, that'll take care of itself because the sun's magnetic field will get stronger and stronger. And what happens then? Well, it burns off our magnetosphere and it burns off our ozone layer, and the temperature on Earth will get so hot that we'll have a super global warming, which will warm up the crust of the Earth and melt the lava that's underneath the crust of the Earth. And then we'll have a stronger magnetic field again, because then we won't have that diversion of the magnetic field through the lava underneath the crust of the Earth. And we'll have a new magnetosphere, and we'll have a new geological age. And the problem is how many species will survive this. When they did the core sampling in the early 80s, they found that every time we had a reversal, by the way, the core sampling, this is 5 nations got together and they cored down in the alluvial fans of the major rivers of the Earth. And they brought the cores up. They could measure what direction the Earth magnetic field was going through that core. And they found that we've had 9 reversals. And 9 reversals, each one of them had a layer of fossils. So it doesn't look good for the future. But now that we have magnetic pads, there's going to be people that's going to survive this, living in magnetic chambers and magnetic pads and stuff like that. But we're on our way down. We're now reversing the whole South Atlantic during the daytime. And this band of magnetism that comes out of the south hemisphere is the same one that goes into the north hemisphere. And so the band that's coming out of the South Atlantic is the one that's going into around Greenland and the North Atlantic. And that's why we have a hole in the ozone layer there. And that's why we're melting the glaciers on Greenland like everything, and part of Canada there too. So we have a global warming now that's caused by a loss of our magnetosphere, which is due to a loss of our Earth magnetic field. So this is the cause of global warming, not what people are telling you. Actually, the more CO2 we make, the more we keep the Earth cool.
Yeah, I've been studying the benefits of carbon dioxide in the body, and plants thrive on it. It seems to be the gatekeeper of oxygen. And so it's so funny that people have been programmed to think CO2 equals global warming. It's like so easy to see that that's not the case.
No, that's the shall we say, globalist hoax. I can tell you a little bit about how that all came about. There was a man from Canada, from Winnipeg, named Maurice Strong, and he worked his way up to Power Corporation in Montreal, and from there he got himself into the United Nations as the assistant secretary to Kofi Annan. So he was number 2 man, and he was the one that pulled the levers there in the UN. And so he called a conference in New York of 300 scientists, and says, we want to know whether what's causing this global warming. And so I knew one of the people that went, and so they deliberated there for a couple months, and they wrote what we call a white paper, and they said that there is no evidence that global warming is man-caused. So Maurice Strong, who was a communist, matter of fact, his aunt was the Tokyo Rose of China, telling people in China that all the Americans were dying from hunger, and bad mouthing on China news all the time. Matter of fact, they even made her a monument on Tiananmen Square, and because she was such a, shall we say, great propagandist for the Communist Party. Well, anyhow, that was his aunt, Maurice Strong's aunt, and he became a partner in the Chery automobile manufacturing plants in China. And their idea was to take over the automobile manufacturing for the world, and cheap labor, of course. And so they had to put everybody else out of business so they could get the business. So they took this white paper that said there was no evidence and took the no out of it, and then called the Kyoto conference. And that was the first conference on global warming.
Wow.
And he presented this paper, which was a fraud, and got this whole thing started. You notice when they did this, they exempted China and India from the restrictions on CO2 production. All the rest of the world, they were restricted. This annoyed the Russians. So when they had the Stockholm conference, the Russians did their homework and hacked in and found that these, well, by the way, the Kyoto conference, they had a resolution that they hire 3,000 scientists to prove that this was true. And so they went around and found some, shall we say, scientists that were starving, and got them to make computer models that, like what Al Gore showed. And these computer models were based on false data, and the Russians proved that at the Stockholm conference. That's why the whole thing collapsed and they moved on, because the Russians showed that they were eliminating any data that showed that there was global cooling, so that it actually made fraudulent results. So that was the 3,000 scientists that supposedly did this. So this is how we got into where we are now. Now, why did the communists want it? It's obvious. They wanted to increase their manufacturing ability in China. They're building 5 coal-fired electrical generating plants every week, 5 a week. So they're dumping huge amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere. And unfortunately, their coal has a lot of mercury in it. So when it gets burnt, we're dumping a huge amount of mercury into the atmosphere, to the point where the fish on the Pacific side of the Sierra Nevadas, which is the mountain range against the Pacific Ocean, which is where we catch the weather coming from China, and is so toxic with mercury that they've even put warnings out, not to eat the trout fish there because they're so mercury toxic. And so all of those fish in sea creatures on the west coast here are getting polluted with mercury and becoming toxic. So that's one of the reasons why we don't want to eat tuna, because they eat the little fish, and so they're collectors of mercury and become concentrators. And tuna fish then is very high in mercury content. So is swordfish. Salmon are good, and trout caught here are not good. So you want to get your salmon from Alaska, preferably.
There's so much good stuff there. I took like an essay worth of notes, but I love it. It's great. Yeah, I'm a big fan of ruminant animals, primarily like grass-fed beef and bison and elk and venison. I think those are generally safer than seafood and have a lot of benefits. But um, yeah, it's funny. I worked at Blockbuster Video when An Inconvenient Truth came out, that Al Gore documentary. And this was before I knew anything about really anything. And I didn't even buy it. I was like, this just looks fake. It looks like it was made up, and I remember the marketing campaign behind that movie. And it's kind of scary because a lot of these social movements, from what I found, like the vegetable oil industry, Monsanto, all of these industries kind of steer public opinion, and sometimes it lasts for half a century, right? And people get so emotional and emotionally charged, but they don't know that their movement was started by a giant corporation.
That's right, or a communist.
Right. That's a fascinating story. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I remember also when I worked at Sports Chalet for a few years, and I used to always hang out in the camping section because I've always been kind of like a prepper, just into survival stuff. And I remember I saw the magnetic bracelets in that area, like I think the Nikon bracelets, and those are like basically performing acupuncture, right? Like
That's
whether it's
right.
PEMF or something like that.
No, we've shown that we can get the same response from those as you can from. Matter of fact, it wasn't even me. It was done by Dr. Saul Lisk, who invented the Lisk stimulator. He showed that you got the same response from a little magnet on an acupoint as you got from a needle stuck into that point,
Wow.
or electroacupuncture in that point. And I proved the same thing after he did.
Interesting. Wow. And one of the big points I wanted to talk about during this interview is I think people have this misconception about magnetism, that to feed your body magnetism, you need to be in direct contact with the earth. But as you mentioned, the mice study were bathed in the earth's magnetic field all the time. Like when we stay at a hotel at a Hilton or something that's like 30, 40 floors up, we're actually further from the surface. And that's the real problem, right? It's not that.
No, it isn't at all. That isn't the problem. We did a study on that.
Really?
You know what the problem is? It's the rebar, the iron in the uprights that around in the middle that's holding this whole thing up. And then you have the floors that have the rebar in it. It's all tied into the uprights in the middle, and there's some on the wall, rebar in the walls going up on the outside of the big buildings. But the middle of those rooms had half the amount of magnetism that you had against the outside walls and against the elevator shafts in the middle.
Wow.
So all those poor women in the middle were getting fat because they had to eat to keep their energy up. And the executives are out on the edge where the magnetism was more than normal Earth magnetism. So you see, soft iron, which is the rebar, is a conductor of magnetic field. So it'll conduct it much easier than air. And so it's drawing all the magnetism up the sides and up the core in the middle of the buildings. And so that's what the problem is there. Walking around barefoot, you're not going to get any more magnetism you get laying in your bed at night. So that's what you do walking around barefoot is you're stimulating the acupoints on the bottom of your feet, which you have many, and which are related. We've known about this when I went to college many, many years ago. I guess that's a lot of years now. Anyhow, yeah, I guess it's more than 65 years ago. Anyhow, we studied all of the different acupoints on the bottom of the feet in anatomy and relating to the different organs of the body. And so when you're walking around, you're stimulating those nerve endings there, which in turn then stimulates electrical flow and blood flow to the different organs. And that's where the big benefit comes from. Because the Earth magnetic field there is the same as it's in your bed.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been wearing the Vibram like 5-finger toe shoes for a while, and you probably get the same benefit there because it's not a huge sole. And I used to ground those, but now, I mean, what Dave Stetzer said is that 70% of the electricity that leaves your home goes back to the station, returns via the Earth. That was proven long ago. And so when you ground, you're connecting to that.
And a frequency.
Yeah. Interesting. So unipolar versus bipolar, this was another point that you made. So that's really the biggest benefit of your product, right? Is you're only getting exposed to the negative polarity instead of both positive and negative.
It's actually more that. It's a little simpler than that. You see, the Earth, southern hemisphere has all positive polarity. In the northern hemisphere has negative polarity. We're talking about the Earth now, measuring the ground, okay? And the reason for that is the magnetosphere of the Earth is made from the movement of the lava, which is liquid, down 20 miles deep. It's liquid, and it's flowing in an opposite direction as the spin of the Earth, and consequently, it's acting like a big circular current magnet, like a coil. And so by the laws of physics, that makes the magnetic field from that coil come out of the southern hemisphere and go back into the northern hemisphere. And so we have at the equator the dividing line between southern polarity and northern polarity. We learned this in a hard way because when we first started this, we sent magnetic pads to the southern hemisphere, and the people called us up immediately after a day of use and say, "Hey, we can't use these things; they're killing us." And then I realized that what could be that. I said, "Turn it over and try it." Turn it over and said, "Oh, this works just great." You see, we were exposing these people to the wrong magnetic field for their hemisphere. And we've sold a lot of magnetic pads in the southern hemisphere, but always they're upside down to what we have up here. So it's the direction of magnetic field going through the body. And this is where we had to learn why. But in the first 2 hours of sleep, you produce most of your human growth hormone. And that human growth hormone makes your cells divide. So most of your cellular division happens the first 2 hours of sleep. And so if you're laying in your bed in the northern hemisphere, you're having the magnetic field come through from the sky and going into the Earth. All those new cells, the atoms in the cells orientate to that magnetic field, which means that they're going to have a direction of orbit on the valence electron that's going to be complementary to that field. Now, if you turn that person over, he's going to be having those electrons on those new cells going the wrong way. So they're going to be slowing down rather than speed up. And this brings in what we found next. We found a formula in physics called the Lamar formula. And it simply says you put a hydrogen atom in a magnetic field and increase the magnetic field, you'll increase the orbital velocity on the valence electrons. And this is a directional magnetic field. That's the formula. Okay, the formula says this is a directional magnetic field. So if you reverse the arrow on the direction of the magnetic field, you'll slow it down. If you have it going the right way, it'll speed it up. So you can speed it up, slow it down. And that's how you're getting the acupuncture effect. By reversing the magnetic field, you're slowing the electrons on the atoms down, which really plays right away into the mitochondria of the cell, because there you have to be making a lot of ATP to run the sodium-potassium pump, which is the mechanism to charge up the cell wall. And when you don't have the ATP, the sodium-potassium pump isn't working, so the charge on the cell wall drops, and you get anoxia in the tissue, in the cell. And that sets off the emergency response, which tells the brain, hey, we need a lot more magnetism down here. So it sends an electromagnetic field down to the tissue, and that's how acupuncture works. And that's how bipolar fields work. They're trying to solve an emergency created by wrong direction of magnetic field. Now, it can be the wrong direction. The southern hemisphere could be negative, and the northern hemisphere it's positive, you see? So it's a lot more complicated than anybody had ever realized. We did all the research to prove all this up. I proved all this up. It was my theories, okay? So that's how this all came about. So you say, well, how do you know? So one of the first things we did was try it on athletes, and we found that the athletes could get 10% higher points if they slept on the magnetic pad before they went out and did their, we're talking about Olympic athletes. So that was one of the first things we did. So we knew that it was enhancing overall body function. As a matter of fact, our next study was on oxygen saturation in the blood. Took 80 people and put them on a magnetic pad for, actually in this case, it was only a half hour. Measured their blood before and after. Guess what? Had much higher oxygen saturation. So we thought, well, how does this work with athletes? So we made a vertical magnetic field, and we had like a big jolly jumper, so they were exercising in front of this vertical magnetic field. I say vertical. The magnetic pad was vertical, but the magnetic field was horizontal, like the Earth magnetic field as far as the body was concerned. And guess what? These people that had the magnetic pad behind them had a 23% advantage in the oxygen saturation as the people that didn't have the magnetic pad. So that was another study we did. So if you were exercising in a magnetic field, a proper one, and this was only 10 times Earth magnetic field is what they were in, then you have a distinct advantage because you have a lot more oxygen. Why do you have more oxygen? Well, because we showed that the heme molecules are picking up a lot more oxygen. They have 8 sites, and they usually run with about 4 or 5 sites full on the heme molecule where they could pick up oxygen. We were getting at least 1 more site filled and with oxygen. So these people were running with a lot more oxygen to their tissues than the others, and the ones without the magnetic field. So these are some of the early things we did. Another interesting experiment about positive and negative. I made a cage that was 2 feet long, and I fed the mice in the middle, right, dividing between the 2 ends. One end I had it positive, and the other end I had it negative. And I put 6 lab mice in there. Immediately they went over and got on the negative side because they were raised in the northern hemisphere. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So I changed the polarity, same cage, everything, just changed the polarity under. And they rushed over to the other side where it was negative. Guess what? They put all their feces on the positive side. I did that 23 times. They went back and forth 23 times. They ate in the middle, but they stayed on one side or the other. Now, this tells you that mice that know nothing about all these theories definitely prefer a proper magnetic field.
And I think I saw on your website, cats. Is there a difference between cats and dogs? I think I saw that cat. I have a little cat, and she loves to sleep on my Magnetico. Do cats prefer negative more than dogs, or is it both? Does it
No, they
depend on the
both do.
hemisphere?
They both do,
Okay.
but it depends on how they sleep. If they're usually sleep on their back or their side, they're going to want a positive field.
Wow, interesting.
When they're talking about preference, they're only going to be on the same magnetic direction of magnetic field they were when they sleep in the first 2 hours of sleep.
Interesting. Wow.
So it's not a consistent thing. So that's some of the early stuff we've learned. And we went on from there. We had people call in and say, do you think that these magnetic pads cure cancer? And I said, well, I have no idea. Well, I had stage 4 cancer and now I don't. The only thing I've done is got on a magnetic pad. And so we thought, well, let's try this out. So we found that some people got well, some people didn't. And so we made stronger and stronger magnetic fields. But before we did that, everybody was talking about these rice machines at the time. That was the big deal. And so I bought the most sophisticated of the rice machines and tried it out, and it didn't cure cancer. Let's put it that way. And then I thought, well, maybe they're doing it wrong. And so I made a very sophisticated device. The whole bed was resonating at these different frequencies. And I made it so that it did a whole sleep cycle every 90 minutes. So it was replicating sleep, but it only at 10 times the strength of the Earth's magnetic field. And guess what? It was interesting, and it was very educational. People, after they'd had a few hours of that, they didn't want to go to sleep because they had the whole night's sleep done in 2 or 3 hours. And it did cure some people. I cured a lady of extreme MS with it. And but I did learn a lot. I learned that people with cancer getting on that bed would only resonate so that they could feel it in their tumor for 20 seconds. But if I raised the frequency, which I could do because I was run by a computer, they would resonate for 2 minutes, and then it would go out of harmonics or resonance, you see. And so I thought, well, we're doing this wrong. So that's how I made the big 10,000 pound electromagnet. I said, well, look, if we have enough power going in, we don't have to worry about the resonance. We'll be able to do things without that. That wasn't right, but that's what my reasoning was. So that's how I made the 10,000 pound electromagnet. And it did a lot of amazing things. Just the other day here, a young man came to my office. I have just a prototype in my office there, and he had a broken fibula. He just broke it on Saturday trimming trees and fell out of the tree. And he's 34 years old, and he had been in and had it set. And so it was proper relationship that ends of the bone. So we put it in the magnet. 3.5 hours, he could walk on it. I treated him for another 2 hours. 5.5 hours, he went back and got it x-rayed, and it was completely healed. I couldn't find the break.
Wow.
Now, I did that with another man of a similar age. It broke both his ulnar and radius on his arm, and he had it in a cast. came in, and it was on the weekend too. He was inline skating with his daughter and fell and broke his arm. And he was a man that had done a lot of machine work for me. So he called me up and says, I need your magic machine. So I put him in there, just put his arm in there. And guess what? 3.5 hours, completely healed that so he could do a chin up on the door. He went back to his orthopedic surgeon who had set the thing the next day and said, hey, the cast is all loose. I want to see if that needs to be recast because it's so loose. Look at how I can just shake. He said, oh, the orthopedic surgeon, oh, don't do that. Don't do that. You're going to wreck everything. And he says, no, look at, just shaking his hand. And so they took it over and x-rayed it. He comes back and he has the 2 x-rays on the viewer, the before and the after, and the one in between where he had set it. So he had three x-rays. He says, now I set this on Saturday and I'm not going crazy and I know it was broken. This is what the x-ray showed. And he says, but over here, I can't find the break.
Wow.
And he turned around to my machinist. He says, what kind of voodoo are you in?
That's the power of magnetism. I read the book, The Body Electric, many years ago. And I think he grew back, like if you cut the tip of your finger off before the joint, right, you can regrow that whole thing. Use magnetism. And he was working with salamanders, and that's fascinating to me.
We've done that with our big machine, and we've grown a lot of things. We treated about 100 cerebral palsy children, growing brain from them. No, this is pretty exciting, but that all got shut down now. We can't use the big machine anymore. The FDA shut that down. So
yeah. I have a friend with TBI, and traumatic brain injury, and she went to a place in Arizona, a huge magnetic room thing, and she said it was so strong that it pulls cars like across the street. But she said that was one of the few things that gave relief. I guess people can go and get treatments with, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 gauss. I don't know how much it is.
No, that was my clinic there.
Oh, okay, cool, yeah.
Yeah, I was in partnership with Dr. McCready there.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? Is magnetism kind of the more the better? I guess it depends.
Yeah, up to 20,000.
Interesting.
Up to 20,000 gauss, yeah. Oh, yeah, that was when I first was playing with this, designing this big thing. Well, why don't we just use the old MRIs, And so I bought a couple of those, and we were playing with those, and I had them in a warehouse, and in 30 feet away there was I learned how to ramp them up. In other words, get them so they were going full force, and there was a Volkswagen that was parked outside, and it pulled that Volkswagen right up to the wall.
Wow. How much do those things put out normally in an MRI machine? How many gauss?
Oh, that one was putting out 20,000 gauss.
Gee. That's incredible.
Anyhow, no, they make them now so that they don't have to put them out such high gauss. Only about 5,000 gauss now, most of them, and which is fine because they have more sensitive receivers in them, so they can get the signals back from the. You know what they're doing? They're making the strong magnetic field is making the water molecules into long strings, and these are like violin strings that they're sending in frequencies against, and they're bouncing back. And so the more water a tissue has, the more strings it has, so the stronger the signal that comes back. That's kind of roughly how an MRI works. And so that just shows you that, magnetism has a lot to do with what's going on in the cells of your body.
That's incredible. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of like red light therapy. I've been studying that for years. And it's funny, MRI, even ultrasound, I've heard can have benefits. People think these things are bad, but maybe short bursts of them can have benefits to the water.
Yeah, the ultrasound you don't want to use too much because you can interfere with cell division,
Mhm.
and that's why short amounts of it is okay, because you're not going to cause a great deal of damage to the fetus. And using it to check and see whether you have calcium in your arteries is a good use of it, and not a big problem. Anyhow, this is go on and on. So where are we at now with the magnetic pads? We've sold thousands of them. I just talking to one of my distributors who finally bought one for himself, and he says you should be selling these things for jet lag. Jet lag. Well, I said, well, that's a big thing to make a big promise on. Well, he says I just flew to Japan and flew back and got on my magnetic pad, and I had both my wife and I had no jet lag whatsoever. And we sold a lot of them to airline pilots for that reason, because it keeps them from suffering from jet lag.
That's incredible. Yeah, the benefits: increased immunity, oxygen saturation, even lowering blood pressure. And you mentioned, I think MS, but fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue are two other things, right?
That's the two big. Now we did do a study with the University of Virginia on fibromyalgia. This is using the very weakest one we make, because we were trying to make it the same as the Japanese Nikken bed, and so we had to make it very weak in that study. And we compared the two. This is 100 and some patients in their study, and they found this is a placebo-controlled, double-blind study, the whole bit, and they found that there was no benefit from the Japanese bed, except on the back where they were getting acupuncture from those little magnets. But as the overall pain level, there was no benefit. And whereas ours had a benefit of 34% reduction in overall pain, and that was significant.
That's
So
incredible.
so then we made them stronger, and as the stronger they got, the better reduction in pain. So we have thousands of people right now that have no pain from their fibromyalgia simply from sleeping on the magnetic pad. Now, how in the world did this happen? Well, as we went along, we learned that most of these people had toxic metals in their brain, which were causing the brain not to produce enough electricity for the body to resonate the tissues to have proper recovery during sleep. And so as we got stronger and stronger pads, these people started having detox responses. And so we started putting them on DMSA, and they were cured. And when we tested their urine for toxic metals, huge amounts of toxic metals came out in their urine. So fibromyalgia primarily is caused from lead and mercury and arsenic poisoning. And there's some of the others poisoning too we found, but like 90% of it is mercury poisoning. And the reason for this fibromyalgia plague that we have now is that two things: the mercury in the fish that we didn't have before, and in the shellfish. That's one thing. But a bigger thing is we started putting the invention of the air rotor was in the early 50s. And so then dentists could put in large amounts of fillings rather than pulling teeth. And so these fillings they were putting in were 50% mercury. And the University of Calgary proved that get this, for 3 hours after you chewed anything, if you had 3 fillings, you had a toxic level of mercury poisoning. They also showed, their research showed how it affected these small levels, how it affected the nerves. It showed how it just killed the nerves. And they did that in petri dishes, of course, but it just was dynamite for the nerves. And so this is what's happening in the brain. These people were getting their brains killed with mercury. And anyhow, the long and the short of it is, this is the answer for fibromyalgia. We tell you where you can get your DMSA over the counter, and we tell you strength of magnetic pad you need and what have you. So that is a big part of chronic fatigue is closely related to this. Usually has a traumatic event associated with it, so the brain is traumatized even more, either a death or a divorce or a loss of a job or something. And so there's a, shall we say, a slower process getting these people back to normal. And but we do, with the stronger magnetic pad, it appears that we do grow new brain cells. Because I can tell you a story about what happened. I was lecturing in Chicago at a health show, and this chiropractor who I've known for years came up to me and says, "You don't know how powerful those things are." And he pointed at the bed. I said, "No, I said they do a lot of good." He says, "Well, I'll tell you a little story." He says, "My daughter, who is 34 years old, another 34-year-old one here, went to Jamaica on a vacation and came back, and she started going downhill." She says she went all the doctors here in Chicago. Nobody could diagnose it, and she just kept going downhill. She ended up in 6 months in the hospital on a respirator, unconscious. And they said, "Well, it's costing you way too much to keep her here. We want to pull the plug." And he said, "No, I want another MRI of her brain before we do that." Because he knew there had to be something with the brain. So they did an MRI of her brain. Her brain was like Swiss cheese, big holes all over it, about the size of the end of your thumb. And he says, "Well, do a needle biopsy of those holes," which they did. Came out, she had parasites from eating improperly cooked pork.
Trichinosis.
Trichinosis, that's right.
Jeez.
So they gave her the right parasite drug for that, to kill that. Anti-parasite drug. And guess what? She was able to breathe on her own because the brainstem hadn't been affected. Now, so the neurologist says, "Now you've got yourself a problem. You got to, might as well take her home and hire a nurse because it's costing you too much here." But she's a vegetable. And so he took her home, put her on a demo pad, which he had bought from me there because he wanted to put it in his office, which is the 20 gauss one, but it was with a thin mattress, so it was probably more like 30 gauss. Hired a nurse, fed her IV to a PICC line. 6 months later, she's back practicing chiropractic. So they took her into her original neurologist there, and it was a team of them actually, and they did an MRI of her brain, and they looked at the brain, and here all those holes were filled in with new brain. And they said, "We had no idea the brain was this plastic. Plastic meaning it could repair itself."
That's amazing. I used to teach at juvenile hall, and I, I would science was my favorite, so I'd show the kids videos. And this one video, it was talking about just repair of the body. You know, those old school like PBS shows, specials or whatever. And I remember what stuck with me. It said, this was like, I don't know, from the 90s. It was like, the heart can't repair and the brain can't repair. Like, we can't grow new brain cells. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, that the body can't repair itself on every level, you know?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we did a study. This is another great use for those magnetic pads. We did a study first with a doctor up in Fresno, and I was lecturing on angina at a toxicity conference in Palm Springs, and he came up to me after. He says, I got a test for you. He says, I don't believe in you, but I'm willing to run this test. He says, I have 3 patients that have extreme angina, and they're on nitroglycerin all the time. And I said, well, have you had them tested for occlusions in their coronary arteries? He says, yes, I've had them tested at the heart lab down at UCLA, and they're running about 60 to 80% occluded. And but they said there's no sense in trying to do bypasses because they're all occluded, so they wouldn't, it wouldn't do much benefit. And I said, what have you done for him? Well, he says, I put him on EDTA chelation and followed all the protocol there with the alpha lipoic acid and high vitamin C and the whole thing. I said, well, did it do any good? He said, not a bit. And we've proven that because he said, I take him in there every 6 months and have him checked. And I said, well, now this is a good test for you. I'll send you 2 of the super beds, the strongest ones, the 20 gauss ones, and you put them on there, and you don't have to do anything else. That's all they have to do. So it wasn't long and their angina was gone. And so in 8 months, he took them to the cardio clinic there at UCLA, and believe it or not, 80% of all of the occlusion in the coronary arteries was gone.
Jeez.
Which was, of course, indicated because they had no more angina.
That's incredible. I guess when you increase the energy of the body, just everything is able to heal.
So that brings me to another lecture, which I gave at the University of Washington. It didn't make sense, this whole thing about cholesterol, because cholesterol is used in the body to. The liver makes cholesterol. It's a precursor to adrenaline, and when we're under a lot of stress, we make a lot of cholesterol because we need a lot of adrenaline, and it's kind of the it might be called the backup to the electricity that the brain makes, our vitality, and so a lot of stress, a lot of cholesterol. Now, when you have a scab, you cut yourself, you make a scab there. One of the first things it does, the cholesterol goes in the scab to make it into a pliable scab. Otherwise, it's hard as a rock, and it's not very functional. So that's what happens in your arteries. You have a damaged artery, and you have fibrocytes make a mesh, and they collect the cholesterol, and the cholesterol then is embedded in the mesh, and then bacteria will come along and set up housekeeping in there, and you'll get inflammation in the cholesterol, and the body tries to wall it off with calcium, And so you get what you call a hard plaque rather than a soft plaque. But how did the damage get in the wall? That's the big question. So we did a lot of work on that. Guess what we found? In the little smooth muscles that are for opening and closing the artery. So when you're under a lot of stress, either emotional or mental, then the arteries open up. So you can get more blood flowing, guess what? To the heart, so you can send more blood to the brain to get more oxygen to the brain. Because when you're under stress, you need to be making more electricity, and it takes a lot more oxygen to make more electricity. So it takes more oxygen for the body too. So these little muscles are working real hard, opening up those arteries when you're under stress. And the longer you're under stress, the harder they work until you get a side ache in them. You know, when you're running too hard and you get a side ache? Well, that's what you get here in those little muscles. They actually then, we have a backup mechanism in the body. When the charge on the cell wall gets too low, then we have what we call the calcium channels, and they start sucking in calcium and other minerals that are positive inside of the cell, so that it keeps the polarity on the cell wall positive, so it draws in the negative oxygen in through the wall. So we keep that cell alive, not by the normal mechanism of using the brain's electrical field to resonate the mitochondria to make the ATP. We're using a chemical mechanism, which is a backup mechanism. So what happens here, prolonged stress, then you end up with a lot of calcium, and that's why we get a calcium score, okay? When we go in and get these tests, see what your calcium score is on your arteries. That tells you how much calcium those little smooth muscles have picked up. But the problem is, calcium will come back out when you get some rest and you get enough electricity flowing to the mitochondria and in those little smooth muscle cells. The ATP is running again, and you got enough charge, and it only takes about 50 millivolt charge, and it'll reverse the calcium channels, and out comes the calcium. So what do we do next? It comes out, everything's fine. But guess what happens? Under prolonged stress, you start building it up there because you don't get enough charge. But the worst part of it is those cells weren't capable of determining what was good metals and was bad metals, because we're not made to be running around with a lot of lead and mercury. So in comes lead and mercury along with the calcium. The calcium will come out 40, 50 millivolts, but it takes about 100 millivolt differential on the cell wall to get the lead and mercury out. You don't make enough ATP in your mitochondria to do that, to get the charge on the cell wall up enough, high enough to do that. So over time, you begin to build more and more mercury and lead in your cell wall muscles, in the muscles in the cell wall. It definitely affects the ability of the mitochondria to produce ATP, because it interferes with it's a toxin, and it interferes with the chemistry in the mitochondria of the smooth muscles. And so after a while, they don't even kick out and make enough to kick out the calcium. And so you have the buildup in this back of the artery, this mixture of calcium and lead and mercury in those poor little cells, to the point where they die. And when they die, something dead in the body wants to get rid of things that are dead, okay? Because they start making pyranes. And so then you have an inflammation. And the inflammation then stops circulation, and the endothelium, which is the other, which is the lining on the inside of the artery, then begins to die, and that becomes the injury. And so right away, the platelets start sticking there to cover over this injury, and then platelets signal the fibrocytes, and the fibrocytes signal the cholesterol, and now you have a plaque. And when the plaque covers over that, then you're stopping more circulation, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it rots out a hole in the cell wall. And you have a burst artery, or you have a plugged up artery due to the size of the plaque that's built up inside of the orifice or the lumen of the artery. And that's how you get cardiovascular disease. Same thing happens in the brain as it does in the heart. Now, as we showed earlier, we actually get the body to heal that up. So we make new cells come in from the sides, and put new muscle cells in there, make a new artery. And when the new artery's there, well, then the plaque leaves, because there's nothing to make it. There's no injury there for it to hold on.
Wow, that's amazing. The more I study health, the more I see it's like a giant domino effect. A lot of these conditions, and as you were speaking, that was amazing. Thank you. And it's like tap water showers with all the chemicals and all heavy metals, and then jogging in the city. I see people jogging in the city every day. I mean, these metals accumulate, right? If someone's living in the city with EMFs, we could just assume they have heavy metal toxicity, right? Breathing car exhaust and all of that stuff.
Yes, they do. Now, the body is pretty wonderful at keeping these things under control, but it shortens life. It's two things, the big things, though. Really, I can talk about three things. Number one, reduce your stress. If you have a stress problem, get more sleep. Whether you want it or not, get more sleep, okay? And reduce your environment, okay? Number two, toxicity. Stay away from toxic situations, air, water, food, all of that. And third, eat right, with proper nutrition. And if you can do all three of those, you're going to live to 100.
But if you want to live to 150, then get one of your pads, right?
That's right.
I just wanted to talk about EMFs, because this perfect segues. The metals relate a lot, because the non-native electromagnetic fields like Wi-Fi and the cell towers, that actually resonates with the metals in people's body, right? Especially in the brain, which can just exacerbate the conditions you were just talking about.
Yeah, that hasn't been proven. Really, what they're doing, this goes on to another lecture. Remember, we talked about this pulsed electromagnetic field, which is your vitality, which resonates at, pulsed at different frequencies to resonate with the different tissues of the body to be able to target the ones that need it most. That is the carrier frequency for the message frequency, from the brain to the tissue, and the tissue back to the brain, to tell the brain what frequencies to resonate at. You say, well, how does the brain know that? It knows it from this message system. So if you were to look on the oscilloscope at this big frequency, like you're looking at a heart thing, you have one big spike and then down. It doesn't look like that. It looks like it has fur on it, a little jagged up and a little jagged down. And that's the message frequency. And that's really weak compared to the resonance frequency. And so when you have Wi-Fi coming in, if it's stronger than that message frequency, you're not getting the message to the tissue telling it what to divide into. If you remember back from Becker's book, he found that if he cut off the myelin sheath, the tissues wouldn't grow. They just made proud flesh, which is stem cells. Well, this is what happens in your body. You just get tumors, and you're not getting the proper differentiation of the different tissues. It takes that message from the brain to tell the stem cell what to be when it grows up. Okay, whether it be muscle or bone or nerve or whatever. Okay, now how did the brain know to send that message out there? This is where the Chinese come in. They found all these meridians and chakra points. You know what those were? Becker found that. This is Dr. Becker at New York State University. He found that that's how the electricity from the cells, which is the little message frequency, flowed back to the spinal cord through the fascia, to the chakra points, up the duramater of the spinal cord, back up to the brain, saying, hey, I need help down here. Send some more electricity down here and some more blood down here. And so that was the message system. And it's this system that they tap into with these, like the Zero and these different biofeedback mechanisms. They tap into that, trying to diagnose disease. See, it all comes together. And Dr. Becker helped a lot in that regard.
That's super interesting. What do you think about PEMF? Because now there's some PEMF companies that are embedding Rife frequencies, because I guess the idea is you need power behind it to actually deliver them deep into the tissue. Do you think pulsed electromagnetic field therapy has validity? Because there's a lot of studies on it. It's interesting.
Yeah, it does. You remember the experiment I told you? You can only resonate a tissue for 2 minutes by moving the frequency up. And that's what Rife was doing. Okay, and that's why Rife, to kill a tumor in the breast, would take many treatments. You'd only able to resonate it for a very short period of time and kill off a few cells. Okay, and then they'd have to do it again the next day and the next day and next day. It kept doing it, usually 30-40 times, and gradually reduce the size of the tumor. That was because when you're putting energy into the cancer cell, you're only able to resonate it to a point where it goes out of frequency. Okay, so that's what we found also. That's why we quit using frequencies and just use more power, because then we can do the same thing with more power. Okay, now and we can do it for day in and day out. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Okay,
but what we were doing is just making the frequencies go up and up and up and up, higher and higher and higher, because we had the power to do it.
Got it. Okay. And I had a question about heavy metals. You've mentioned, I think, DMPS in some of your videos, but DMSA. I used to take chlorella, and people are so, I think, confused. There's so many heavy metal products out there. Is DMSA like the top thing that you recommend if someone's releasing?
It's the most aggressive, yes. And it's by far the best for mercury.
Interesting.
EDTA works pretty good for lead. So if you drop your lead exposure down some, well, then you get some of the cells working that weren't working before because of the combination, both the lead and the mercury. So you get some benefit out of it. And so EDTA has benefits, but it's not near what the EDTA, pardon me, what DMSA will do. DMSA will take both lead and mercury, all of the metals out. So you're getting the broad spectrum there. The DMPS was a little too radical. We started out with that, and that was pretty scary stuff. And so we quit using that and went to DMSA, which we've not had a problem with.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, on your website, I like the two little charts you have there, and the one says 2 nights on the Magnetico and 50 milligrams of DMSA. It's 80% reduction in lead, 45% reduction in mercury, 58% reduction in tin. I mean, these are amazing numbers just for 2 nights. It's incredible.
Yeah, well, it depends on how available that is. If it's in the brain, it's not going to come out that fast, or in the heart. But if it's in the muscles, it'll come out in spades. Okay.
Wow.
So it depends on where it's at. It's difficult to get it out of the brain, and because your regenerating capacity in the brain is slow. Now, we wanted to, I made a big statement here that we regenerate brain tissue and heart tissue. So we wanted to check that out. So we made a small MME, little one like this. We can put in an incubator and give it to I hesitate to say this, the biophysics lab at Johns Hopkins, and asked them to test and see what it did to nerve cells, and whether it made them proliferate or what it did. And guess what? They found that it made the nerve cells differentiate. In other words, that's grow up. Okay?
That's incredible. Have you done any research on farm animals, like chicken with egg production or cows with milk production? No, I would imagine that would go up.
We went right to humans because that was the greatest need. But we tend to, shall we say, cycle our meat production pretty quickly. So the disease there isn't as big a problem as it is in humans, which we keep going a lot longer.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. Years ago, I saw there's some people out there making do-it-yourself magnetic sleep pads and just taking like neodymium magnets and alternating them, just like each side. And I think one I watched, they're like, yeah, I wake up in the middle of the night sweating, so I have to like move to one side. I'm like, this can't be good, right? It sounds stressful.
Yeah, well, they were stressing the body like everything, and increasing circulation, of course, which is causing the increasing metabolism. The body was trying to survive in that unnatural environment.
Yeah, you can definitely mess yourself up with do-it-yourself. I've experienced it. I'm about a decade into health and done some stupid experiments, and luckily not long-term enough to cause serious damage. So you have, I just want to talk about the different pads that you have. It's basically 5, 10, and then 20 Gauss, right? Those are the three different models.
Yeah, we use the 5 for children a lot of times. And people that can't afford anything more. And because it's better than nothing. Okay. And especially with arthritis, we started using that with arthritis, and we did a study on that. We had about a 90-some% efficacy rate on arthritis, not with the 5 Gauss, but with the 10 Gauss. But it was working quite well even with the 5 Gauss. So if they can't afford the 10 Gauss, then at least they can do is get the 5 Gauss.
And that's still, what is it? It's like 5 times stronger, 20 times or 10 times stronger. I forget because the
5 Gauss is 5 Gauss is 10 times Earth field.
Okay.
10 Gauss is 20 times Earth field, and the super bed, which is 40 times Earth magnetic field.
Wow. Because we're at less than 0.5 Gauss, right? The current.
That's what we are now. Yeah.
Wow. And you were talking about the pole reversal earlier. I want to live to see that, but we're probably, I think you've said in some lectures, we're like probably 300 to 500 years away from that actually happening, where it reaches zero.
Well, at different times during the day, you see, one time of the day, you're going to be in the Earth and the Sun magnetic field, which is going the wrong direction. Okay, and then as the Earth turns, that's going to get weaker because you're not facing the sun. So you're going to get to a 0 point. Okay, and then you'll start with the Earth magnetic field during the night, which will be much weaker than it was before.
Wow. Fascinating. Yeah, I sleep on the 20 Gauss, and I've been on that for, I think, almost 2 years now. And it's just incredible. It's hard to describe, but I mean, I have a little Aura ring, sleep tracker in airplane mode. And my sleep is awesome. And I think I recover a lot faster from stress and travel and all of that.
Well, you should, because you're getting a lot more electricity out of your brain. So, which is going to resonate in the tissue a lot faster, so you're going to have much faster recovery. And you're running at much higher oxygen.
I can feel it, yeah. So is there anything else you wanted to mention? I think we covered the basic idea of magnetism. It's once you get it, you get it. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, we find that it does good for a lot of different things every day. That people call in and say, did this for me and that for me. But there's only so many studies that you can afford to do. And so this is about all I can do is tell you what we've learned. And I had an interesting call this morning on what does it do with microcirculation. Well, I had to think back, and I had this World War II veteran that became a dealer. And so he arranged for me to come and lecture in a town north of where I was staying. And I was lecturing, and this guy says, "You haven't said anything about what it does for varicose veins." And I said, "Well, I didn't know it did anything for varicose veins." And he says, "Well, I had the worst varicose veins because my legs were frozen from being in the prison camps in the war." And he said, "Now look at him." So he steps out on the aisle and he pulls his pant leg up and shows his legs. He says, "Now, you see, I have no varicose veins, which I'd had all my life from my legs being frozen." So anyhow, you don't know what it'll do. All you know that you're putting a lot of energy into the body, and when you do that, you can heal a lot of things. And so it's worth a try, no matter what it is.
Yeah, I like that you brought up those three things. Lowering stress, number one. I'm in complete 1,000% agreement with you there. And nutrition and your environment. And I put magnetism as one of the foundational things, because I think I've done consults in the past and people will reach for supplements and this protocol and that protocol and this diet and all this stuff, but they're missing like the basic foundation.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed. That was the basic foundation, but that's the earth. So yes, enhance your life with magnetism. Okay. I was talking about what do you do plus that,
Mm-hmm. I love it. Yeah, it's so important. I think with 5G coming now, and it's kind of like you're also putting yourself in a protective bubble, right? And you're making more energy to resist the stress, but as you're in the bed, you're actually surrounded in it.
That's the big thing. Now we don't make a shield from the Wi-Fi. We make the brain so it's strong enough to shield the Wi-Fi. In other words, it becomes the stronger signal. The stronger signal always wins, you see?
That's an easy way to explain it. I love your analogies and stuff. You taught when I went to school, I was pretty bad at math, but when I finally had a teacher that could explain it in the right way that my brain could understand, I was super happy. It's like, wow, every teacher has been explaining it this super hard way. So really appreciate how you break all this down, because it makes total sense.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Matt, and you have a great day.
Thanks, you too, Dean. Thanks so much. Hang on, we're going to close out the show.
That's probably an interview that you'll have to listen to multiple times. A lot of that I didn't know, most of it. and I learned a lot. I really love how Dean Bonlie explains things. It's very easy to understand. And that's wild that there are 9 pole reversals, with each one having a layer of fossils, and that we're overdue for a pole shift. I used to teach geology to students in a juvenile detention facility, and I was actually researching Dean Bonlie's work at the same time. And it's really interesting how this all connects with the tectonic plates and what they call global warming, and just this understanding can really help to put a lot of these puzzle pieces together. And then when you apply it to your health, it becomes even more interesting. And I think a lot of people have no idea that this kind of technology exists. They just see, like we talked about, the Niken or these magnetic bracelets at the store and just brush it off. But they don't know that there's actually legitimate, hard research on using magnetism to improve health. And a lot of people have had alleviation of health conditions, as he spoke about in the interview. I think you could be on the best diet, taking all of the best supplements, and still be unhealthy if you're in an unhealthy environment. So the really cool thing about the Magnetico sleep pad is you can really transform your environment, especially if you're in a city, you're surrounded by people with Wi-Fi routers and tons of electronics. This really, really helps to take the stress off the body, and it's actually probably one of the top 5 purchases that I've ever made for my health, and I'll use it for probably the rest of my life. So if you're interested in learning more, I'll put the link below. You can go to magneticosleep.com. It's also available on my website, matt-blackburn.com. And with any pad that you order, if you use the discount code Blackburn, you can actually save 15%, which is a huge savings depending on the type of model that you get. I would just say go with the one that you can afford. I'm currently sleeping on the Super Sleep system, which is their strongest, their 20 gauss. It's difficult to express how much it's affected me. I would say just increased productivity, mental function, strength, endurance, everything. I'll put the 2 links below to the lectures that he has on YouTube, Magnetochelation and then one called Magnetism. And I've seen those multiple times, and that's a really good breakdown of how this works if you want to go even deeper than what he explained in this podcast episode. Really, really great talks that Dean Bonlie did. Today's quote is by Ralph Waldo Emerson. "The laws of light and of heat translate each other. So do the laws of sound and color. And so galvanism, electricity, and magnetism are varied forms of this selfsame energy."